for a whole lot of time. Congress, we work very heavily with Congress, and it's not so much the Congress members themselves, but more and more the staffers, their employees. They're so key to getting things done. And often it involves explaining things to staffers, but not just explaining things in a way that the staffers can understand, but explaining them in a way that they can then go and teach their boss or teach the other staffers what we're talking about in our perspective. So it's like pedagogy, but you're teaching people how to teach other people. It can get pretty difficult. We do this through a number of things, like briefings is a good example. You can go in and talk to a staffer and explain why Backdoor as a software is bad. Or you may have a bunch of people on their lunch break for 45 minutes and you feed them and you tell them some stuff and then they get here and they go, okay, cool. At least they have a point at which they can think about the things that they're going to be writing laws or having hearings about. We do a lot of commenting on legislation. We'll say, what do you think about this bill? A staffer will say, what do you think about this bill? We do that, and we have to be careful about that because we're not registered lobbyists, and 20% of our time we do more of that, and then all of a sudden it becomes a big problem, and we have to start registering as lobbyists. Testimony is really one of the key ways that stuff gets out in the open. This is where you have a hearing, and you have witnesses show up, and people say their piece, and they get grilled, and sometimes it can be very adversarial, sometimes it can be kind of boring. Often we're asked to testify. We have a lot of sort of nerds and people who know a lot of very deep things about technology and policy. But more often than not, we try and find the right person. Oh, you want to have someone who wants to talk about the security of smart card technology. Oh, we can find someone who knows about that stuff. And in order to make this work, we try very hard. This is, it takes a lot more work than, I don't know how to tell you how much work it is. We try and make this sort of plug and play, where we have experts come in and make sure that they can go, show up at Congress, say something, make their sort of case, talk about their work or work that they know about, and leave, and not, the goal there is to make them want to come back again. And so things like, often you have to deliver 50 copies, printed copies of testimony to somebody, and we don't want some professor to have to worry about making 50 copies of something and sending it off somewhere, or making sure they show up. So we try and do that, and then substantively we'll read things that people ask us to read and say, this is going to trigger that, this is in play, you want to think about that. They're not probably going to ask you about this. Anyway. Work a lot with the executive branch, so this is the White House and the various agencies. We have very close ties with people in the White House, the national security staff, the former CDT staffer, Ari Swartz, the director of civil liberties at the national security staff, the White House Office of Scientific Technology Policy. This is sort of an alphabet soup slide. This is the one where you're most likely to fall asleep. It's really important though, because this is sort of like the org chart of the executive branch in some sense. U.S. Trade represented a ton of agencies, the Department of Commerce, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, sort of government's own scientists and people who standardize things. And then a whole bunch of sort of operational folks, the Federal Trade Commission that deals with consumer protection issues, the Federal Communications Commission that deals with how devices that broadcast radio waves have to operate. HHS, health stuff like healthcare.gov, big freaking mess, and the FDA that regulates medical devices. And lately, strangely enough, the drone stuff, the Federal Aviation Administration, who really doesn't want to think about privacy at all. They're not very good at it. We do, and it's really important to understand when a law is passed, they're often at an extremely high level. So it says, we want you to put up a website where people can go buy insurance. And they don't tell you how to do that or what the parameters are. And one of these agencies has to go and write a rule. Has to write a very long, sometimes hundreds, thousands of pages that says, here's operationally how you build a website that does that. And the way they do this is a various set of things. These things are defined RFIs, ANPRMs, NPRMs, and RFIs are requests for information. Like, hey, we don't know a lot about this, please tell us something about that. Write a short little paper and let us know. ANPRM is an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking. That's like, this law says we have to write a rule about this. We're not really sure what the rule should look like. We're thinking about this. What do you think? And then finally, we establish an NPRM, a notice of proposed propose rulemaking. That's where they say, the law says we have to make a rule about X. Here's the actual text of the rule we're proposing. Please give us feedback. We're required to do this by law. We regularly work with some of these agencies in terms of workshops. For example, on the 19th, I'll be speaking at an Internet of Things workshop on a telehealth panel, so devices that mediate health things, network connections with your provider, or a service like Fitbit. That's a very simple fitness-oriented lifestyle, not like insulin pump or something that's not interface with a smartphone. We don't do a lot of court stuff. We don't only rarely look at it. The last time we did it in government companies, Reno ACLU. I don't know if it is. It may not be much now.
Pennsylvania.
Did we? Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I need to know about that. But we do often file what's called amici or amicus curiae. That's when you have two people duking it out in court, and you bring in the third perspective. And you say, neither of these parties are going to adequately represent the public interest, for example. We're going to tell you what we think. You should think about that. We do pay very close attention to the courts. We can't help it. We have to. And we support some of our very close allies, like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the American Civil Liberties Union, and Public Knowledge, when they do follow.
So, did you say you're required by law to give feedback?
No.
The previous slide?
No. We can talk about that later. They're required by law to ask for feedback.
Sorry.
We take advantage of that to give them feedback. Press, so this is the last one, sort of the fourth estate. Press is, it's funny, as an academic, I used to be really excited when, I guess I am sometimes now still, I used to get really excited when the press would come and say, hey, what are you working on? What do you think about this? And Deirdre taught me very wisely that it's often helpful to be on background, not to get the quote, but to help them shape the story and the facts and the people that they need to talk to. It can be a lot of work for me now, especially when there's a Snowden book. It's almost like half of my day, if not a whole day, of just handling press calls. But it is a really important feature of all this stuff because it's a big part of what I do in terms of translation. You have to explain the technology in a way that laymen can understand. What is IPv6? What is the domain name system? What are these things? Using analogies, can you try and bring that down to a level where people can understand it? And bringing in things that have happened with other outside sources of expertise. So look, that's what you may be hearing about healthcare.gov, and you need to know these other things as well. It can be a big challenge. We'll quote you, and very rarely, although not too rarely, very rarely will they clear the quotes. You ever get to see the quote before it shows it in print. Here's a good example from the other day. Healthcare.gov has a ton of security flaws, and they are if you have any computer security expertise whatsoever, they are sort of very basic types of web security flaws that should not happen. So I was talking to a reporter, and the quote, the opening and closing quote, and 8 other people quoted in this story, was me, which is great, although it looks really aggressive because I say some of these things are amateur hour. And what I mean by that is, as I say, you could not pass an undergraduate computer science class by making these kinds of mistakes. And it's really true. In the case of healthcare.gov, and forgive me for the non-technical folks in the room, they were leaking referrer headers to doubleclick.net and pingdom that had usernames and password reset codes that you could totally use to log in as anyone who showed up. And which is, just basic cross-site vulnerability stuff. You just don't do that. And as you can see at the bottom, they often don't get the quotes exactly correct. And what I say is when it comes to functionality, the last thing you think about is security. What I meant was, often when people are building something, they don't think about the adversaries that may be involved. Not that there's a way of building things where you think about security last. That's exactly the opposite of what I meant. You have to think about it really early on. Privacy, usability, accessibility, security, all these things that you thought about at the very beginning to have a hope of building it in your system. There's a lot of what we do also is meeting with people, and part of that is, I guess, people are less aggressive, less, trying not to use bad words. People do different things in face-to-face interaction. You have a harder time, saying certain things when you're in face-to-face interaction. So we work with a ton of people, and just to give you a flavor, some of the things we'll do is we'll have a closed-door meeting. We invite people in to talk about a certain subject, and we have various kinds of rules, like a Chatham House rule, if you've ever heard that. That means you're welcome to say you're welcome to say anything that's said in the room to anyone you want. You can't say who said it. So that allows the sort of issues to be raised and discussed later, but you can't attribute them to particular people. A good example of that is one we had on what we call Hack Back. And this is where businesses are being attacked by various adversaries all over the world, China, whatever you want to call it, anonymous. And some of them want to actually attack back. They want to try and either get their stuff back or whatever, do certain things. And there's not a really good framework for thinking about this stuff in DC. It's basically illegal if you do it outside of your own network. You're taking a real risk and you might get in trouble with the law. But there's various ways